I realize that I'm the only thing between you and drinks, so I'm going to try to go very quickly. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go so quickly that I'm going to be tweeting while I talk because I'm not going to have time to stop if people need to take notes. So if you want to follow along while I tweet, it's Griggs_talks. My normal Twitter handle is just @Griggs. Our company is here in Portland, and I bring that up only because if you're not aware, we host an open device testing lab. It was actually the first device testing lab in the world. Now, if you go to opendevicelab.com, you can find them all over the globe, but it actually started here in Portland, Oregon. So, have you heard the hype around progressive web apps? Well, if you haven't, for those of you who haven't, don't worry, the tech press won't let you get away from it for much longer. They're writing about how Google and others are plotting the revenge of the web app, which, because I'm here to talk to you about that, must mean that I'm out in like some sort of secret cabal out to get people. So watch out in the reception. Or they're writing about how progressive web apps promise to upend native applications. We will no longer need any native apps, all of you. All we need is the web, as the father of the internet, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, always intended it. They're writing about how mobile apps have one foot in the grave, which is quite a thing when it wasn't that long ago that they were talking about how the web was dead. But don't worry about it. The web isn't dead. As a matter of fact, Wired updated this article, and it's not dead after all. As a matter of fact, Google saved it. Hallelujah. Thank you, Google. I was a little worried about our friend, the web. You know what? You know how they saved it? Yeah, you guessed it. Progressive web apps. See, the media loves any opportunity to pit one group against each other, right? Like Republicans, Democrats, red states, blue states. And of course, from the tech community's perspective, the persistent battle since 2007, which is, of course, mobile web versus native applications. And I got to tell you, I am incredibly frustrated with this. This has been going on for so long. Okay, I'll just take a deep breath. See, it's really important. Progressive web apps, I think, are an incredible innovation in what we can provide for the experiences for our customers. And where we are in the Gartner hype cycle is really just like there, right? Like most people don't even know about progressive web apps yet. And if we continue to talk about them as something that's going to end native applications, that peak of inflated expectations is going to be so high that it's going to be like falling off a cliff when we go down into the trough of disillusionment. So I'm here to cut through all that stuff, to talk about why progressive web apps matter, why they make sense no matter what you're doing with your site, how they can make your site better, and then sort of just briefly how you can roll out an incremental plan for a progressive web app. So first, like, what is a progressive web app? Well, to talk about this, I'm going to show you a quick video that Google did that I think does a good job of describing sort of the potential of progressive web apps.
The only thing that evolves faster than technology is our expectations. We want everything. Better, easier, now. Suddenly, downloading an app feels like it takes forever. And in many parts of the world, data is still at a premium, with 1 megabyte costing up to 5% of a monthly wage. Let's face it though, until now, the alternative to native apps hasn't been great. But that was then. Progressive web apps can now deliver mobile web experiences with a native look and feel, offering features like real-time push notifications, adding a site to your home screen so you can easily jump back to it with a single tap, even when you're offline. Plus the ability to make quick payments on the go, and all from your browser. This is the next generation of the mobile web. So what are we waiting for? Let's go and build something great.
I was making fun of the media for hyping things earlier, but maybe they're not totally to blame. There were like horses on the beach. I'm not sure what they were about, but I mean, that's what progressive web apps can do. In reality, as the video points out, progressive web apps are about bringing features that were previously only available if you're building a native application and bringing them to the web. So the ability to have things that are instantaneously loading, that are incredibly fast, that have smooth animations, that the ability to have an icon on the home screen, to have something that's secure, to do push notifications, and of course to have something that's responsive. So you get those features whether it's on a phone or on a desktop computer. And some of the early examples of these applications are really great. So Flipkart is an e-commerce company in India. And they decided that they didn't like their mobile web experience. So they just decided they were going to go away from the web entirely. It didn't work incredibly well. And so they decided to build a progressive web app. And this is the end result of that. And what you have is you have an application that feels incredibly fluid. You see how there's animation and things are flowing back and forth. Like, it's a great, rich experience. And not only that, but it's an experience where if they go into offline mode, they can continue to browse the website. They can continue to interact with that application, even though they're offline. Another example of it is actually what The Guardian did with what they called Rio Run. This is something that they did for the Rio Olympics, and it's a really great application, which when you launch the application, it sort of shows you a route. And you can either go on the route that the Olympics, the people who are running in a marathon are going to do, or you can actually, you can sort of hear the music and a guide, right? Like, basically, it allows somebody to run along the route, whether they're on a treadmill or whether they're somewhere else. You earn badges as you're running this route. And then at any point during this process, if you need to stop, you can stop the application. It'll save your spot on the run. And then even if you're offline, so in this case, I'm going to go ahead and stop the application. I'm going to leave. And then I come back, clear the application so that there's nothing running. And then I go and I turn off, go into airplane mode, right? So now I'm completely offline. And I can launch the application again, and it keeps track of all the badges, and not only that, but the full soundtrack and all of the features that you would expect are still there.
Welcome back to Rio Run.
Right?
Please remember
Pretty
to
great
stay aware of
experience.
your-
Twitter released Twitter Lite recently. Their interactive web page is much faster than it was before. They've seen something like 60 to 70% increase in the amount of interactions and tweets and a bunch of different stuff that they've seen in terms of launching this application. Not only is that happening, but the browsers are providing incentives for organizations that build progressive web apps. Those incentives are starting sort of simply. So if you've got a progressive web app and the browser detects that you've got a progressive web app, they will prompt people to add that progressive web app to their home screen. And this is really interesting because the browsers theorize that they'll be able to sort of watch behavior and know when it's more likely that somebody will actually add it to their home screen. And right now, what they're finding, at least Google has found, is that progressive web app add to home screen banners convert 5 to 6 times more than native application install screens. Part of this has to do with simply the fact that when you've got a progressive web app, the install process is instantaneous. Because the first time somebody visits a site, the progressive web app is installed. That act of adding it to the home screen is just adding an icon. But behind the scenes, all of the functionality of a progressive web app is possible, even if the person never actually installs it to their home screen. They can get the push notifications. They can get the very fast experience. They're also doing things like integrating progressive web apps much deeper into the Android operating system. So now it's in the tray, it's in settings. What they're doing behind the scenes is they're basically taking your website and wrapping it in a web APK, which is, APK is just like the Android program. So it's very likely, I think, that at some point we will see those applications start to show up in the Apple Play or in the Google Play Store. Coming soon, like I said, we may see them in Google Play. We're definitely going to see them in the Microsoft Store. Microsoft has already announced that progressive web apps will be available in the progressive web app store, and they'll get in there in 2 ways. One of them is that you actively submit it. The other way is that the Bing search bot just finds progressive web apps and puts them in the store. It's also likely that we're going to see search engine optimization benefits. So Bing is also going to badge progressive web apps and highlight them in search results. there are strong indications that Google will be doing the same thing. So if you're looking at ways to increase your SEO, looking at and getting ahead of progressive web apps would be a way to do so. But even if the browsers weren't doing this, I would argue that progressive web apps simply make sense. They make sense irrespective of what the browsers do, and they make sense irrespective of what you may already have in a native application. And I'm going to make this argument in 6 pieces, and these are 6 pieces that I believe even a native app developer would agree with. All right, the first one. Not every customer or potential customer will install your native application. Right? Well, duh, right? I mean, it seems really obvious, but sometimes we have to restate the obvious. And we have to restate the obvious because I've had conversations with people where they say, well, why would we do a progressive web app when we've already got a native app? We're investing in iOS, we're investing in Android, we're doing all these other things. And I'm like, not all of your customers use that app. Even the customers that have that app installed may be on their desktop computer where they don't have access to the app. And I bet you that 100% of your potential customers don't have the app installed. What do all of those people do? They go to your website. So providing a superior experience for those people who access your website makes a lot of sense. Progressive web apps are a superior experience. Plus, frankly, there are kind of some problems with the App Store. I don't know if you all noticed, but there are over 2 million apps in the App Store. It's a lot of different apps. Trying to stand out is difficult. And, people aren't installing apps. This is a little known secret. The average user in the United States doesn't install any apps in a month. Retention of daily active users is pretty terrible. It's something like after 90 days, 90% of people aren't using the app anymore. I think it's 3 days, you lose 70% of your users. I've got the statistics I can show you later if you're interested in that information. But it's pretty daunting and pretty humbling, sobering information. Being in the App Store is no longer enough. Companies are spending more and more money to get people to install their applications. And when they spend that money, they're basically routing people to websites to try to convince them to install the applications. Mobile web audiences are 3 times as large and growing twice as fast as app stores. So it makes sense in my mind, both because we know that there are people who are not installing the native application, or maybe on a device where they don't have the native application, and plus, those customers, their first experience might be with the website. Providing a progressive web app will increase the chances that somebody will actually install a native application at some point down the road. All right, the second thing. You should provide a secure site or app for your customers, right? That just makes sense. I mean, you might be worried about those folks or maybe those folks, and really we should probably encrypt all the sites because that's the good thing to do. But providing a secure site actually provides a bunch of additional benefits that we otherwise don't have access to. I mean, first, primarily, a secure website is a requirement for a progressive web app. But you also get access to things like HTTP2, which is a new protocol, which is much faster than HTTP1. You get access to things like geolocation that you don't have access to otherwise. And just generally, we should provide secure sites. You should provide a fast experience for your customers. Again, yeah, of course. And here's the thing, progressive web apps are one of the best ways to do this. Right? It's much, much faster. And the reason they're faster, and I'm not going to go into much detail on this, but is a piece of technology called a service worker. Service workers basically allow people to explicitly say, hey, I want to cache a bunch of stuff offline so it's available very, very quickly the next time somebody wants access to it. That's how we get the speed improvements. Your customers would benefit from an offline experience. Maybe. Depends on what you're doing. But the service workers that I was talking about, they're the key to providing that offline experience. Because you can cache things offline to make things fast, you could also cache whole pages, whole applications. You can make things so that the whole experience works, even if the person doesn't have a data connection. Your customers might benefit from push notifications, right? If you're eBay and people come to your site or to an auction via search, right now, without push notifications, without progressive web apps, your option is to try to get them to install your native application and then give you permission to send them notifications so that you might be able to entice them back as the auction ends. Instead, you could put in that web page something that said, do you want to be notified 5 minutes before the auction ends? And through that notification, basically just trigger that notification right there without having to go through that process. And then the sixth thing is like, you can create some icons and write a text file, or at least somebody on your team can. I mean, I'm showing you, this is what a manifest file is. This is what describes a progressive web app. This is the only code on this whole deck. But I just wanted to show you, like, this is nothing complex, right? Like, that's the last part. So every step on the path to a progressive web app makes sense on its own, right? This is why I believe that a lot of organizations will start looking at progressive web apps. And the early results for progressive web apps are incredibly promising. Conga, for example, sees 92% less data than their native application, 63% less data on initial load versus their previous web experience. Extra Electronics has seen a 12% increase in click-through rate, 100% more sales from people who arrive via web push, a 4x increase in engagement. 5 Miles, 50% decrease in bounce rates, 30% better in conversion for people who arrive via the icon. And Ola Cabs, and this is one of my favorite ones, they see a 68% increase in mobile traffic. They're actually seeing higher usage. They're in India, and so third-tier cities are smaller cities. They see higher usage in those third-tier cities than they do on their native applications. And like, this is a really cool thing. 20% of the people who book in their progressive web app have previously uninstalled their native application. So they're actually getting customers back by doing this. We maintain a website called pwastats.com where we keep track of every time people are announcing statistics about progressive web apps and the benefits they're seeing in their organization. So if you want something that you can use to sort of convince people that this is something they should look at, you can go to that site, pwastats.com, and find similar businesses that are doing progressive web apps. This is the question that I get all the time. Okay, progressive web apps are great, but iOS doesn't support progressive web apps. It really depends on what you, like, I hate to say it, but it's on your definition of support. See, progressive web apps use progressive enhancement, which is a web technique that basically says there's a baseline experience, and then if the browser supports more advanced features, we go ahead and use those advanced features. So there's nothing inherent in a progressive web app that won't work on iOS. It's just that things like push notifications aren't available on the web on iOS, or at least not yet. But billions of people use browsers that support progressive web app features, and Safari has hinted at the fact that they're looking at service workers, which I mentioned earlier, and that would be like the key, the linchpin to actually having a great experience on iOS. And the organizations that actually install or are doing progressive web apps are seeing huge increases on iOS as well. So AliExpress sees a 104% increase for new users across all browsers, but they're also seeing an 82% increase in iOS conversion. The Washington Post has talked about how they're seeing a 5x increase in user engagement. And so I asked the product manager, like, hey, is there any difference you're seeing between iOS and Android users? And he said that there's minimal difference. And I think the reason for this is because when you work on progressive web apps, one of the main things you end up doing is spending time trying to provide a very fast, frictionless, fluid experience. And that work, even if it can't take advantage of all of the pieces that are parts of progressive web apps, that work still makes a difference even on iOS. So the progressive web app on iOS for the Washington Post is faster than their old mobile site. As a matter of fact, for a while, they were running them side by side. You could opt into the progressive web app. And so I spent a ton of time instrumenting the two to sort of see the differences between them. In many ways, progressive web apps are like a Trojan horse for performance, right? It's a way to get organizations to pay attention to something that really, really matters to users, but is a little harder to convince people of. The ability to actually have something that's so fast that people just want to spend time interacting with your application. So here are the 6 reasons why I think progressive web apps make sense. Not every customer will have your native application installed. You want to provide them with a good experience. You should provide a secure site because, like, you should provide a secure site. You want to provide a fast experience. Your customers would benefit from an offline experience. They probably would benefit from push notifications as well. And of course, like somebody on your team can write a text file. Pretty simple. So hopefully, because of that, you're like, okay, this sounds awesome. What does it mean for us to go build something like that? And I got to tell you, as a father, I am now a big fan of dad jokes. And so I find progressive web apps to be full of puns. They're progressively punny. For example, progressive web apps are progressive because they're built on this web technique called progressive enhancement. Okay, that's not really funny. They're progressive because they promote a relationship with your users. Right? Like instead of like immediately asking them to do push notifications, like their first interaction could be that they come and they just visit your site and it's really fast, and behind the scenes, the progressive web app's installed. And then the second time they come, wow, it's even faster on the second page. And then maybe they indicate some interest, and now you're like, hey, would you like some push notifications? And then the browser says, wow, this user seems to be interested in this. Let's ask them if they want to put it on their home screen, right? Like it's a progressive relationship. I also think they're progressive because you can have a progressive roadmap. So when we redesigned our site last year, we knew we wanted to have a progressive web app. So we started out with that in mind. So when we launched our redesign, we not only launched a redesign, but we also moved to a secure server, and we put a manifest in place. The manifest files are actually also helpful for people who bookmark to the home screen on Android. It gives them your icon, so like it's something you should do anyways. Then a couple months later, we added a service worker and a really bad-looking offline page. It was kind of ugly. I hope it's not in the HTTP archives. It was technically a progressive web app at that point. But then we added a prettier offline indicator, and we did offline pages, so if you're reading something and then you go offline, you can still browse our site. And then we did push notifications. And then a couple weeks later, we announced that we had a progressive web app. Yay, right? We didn't have to wait to bundle up a binary and submit it to the App Store and wait for people to get use of these new features. We were able to provide value to our customers, to our visitors, really, because we don't really have customers of our site, but to our visitors at every step along the way. And we're not done. We continue to work on making that experience better. See, because as I said, every step on the path to a progressive web app makes sense on its own. You're actually providing value each step along the way. So I started by talking about the hype around progressive web apps and how it drives me a little nuts. And it drives me nuts not because there's hype, but because the hype is misplaced. It's looking at the wrong thing. It's sort of like all framed as native versus web. But as you can tell, because I'm talking so fast, I'm a little hyped about progressive web apps. As a matter of fact, I think that they can provide experiences that we have never been able to do before on the web. And I want to show you just a video from this company Wego that like does flights that sort of ties us all together into what an experience could look like using progressive web apps. So you can see how taking all the pieces, and some of those weren't pieces that are technically part of a progressive web app, things like the ability to have payment requests that basically use like Apple Pay or use Google Wallet. Those aren't technically part of a progressive web app, but they're part of what I consider sort of this bundle of technology for which progressive web apps are turning out to be sort of a banner, a bundle to describe. And that bundle really allows us to have a web renaissance, to build the sorts of experiences that were never possible on mobile, and frankly, were never possible on desktop in the past. And so I encourage you to think about the properties that you maintain, the sites that you work with, and try to figure out, like, are we actually using the web to its fullest, especially given what's possible today? Thank you very much.